Guess what? I got a fever.
You give me fever, fever in the morning, a fever all through the night.
Okay, folks, welcome to episode 81 of the Dynasty Fever podcast, talking about Dynasty Fantasy Football. I'm Brian Ford here with my co-host Jesse Schneeman. Please make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. Also show some love to our YouTube channel as we're putting more stuff up there. Jesse, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Brian. How are you?
Doing okay. Better now that we're among friends and recording, and I've had a nap. By the way, episode 81 is the Jerry Philbin or Dustin Keller episode. Two Jets who wore number 81. Jerry Philbin, like a defensive player in like the 70s and 80s. Dustin Keller in the 2000s was a pretty good tight end that you might remember. 81, however, for the Eagles has a bit more of a notorious history.
Yeah. We're gonna go down the TO road. I mean, I kind of have to let that one go. I will say this: my father, who has never dropped an F-bomb in his life, as far as I know, actually wore a T-shirt that said "FUTO." I couldn't believe it.
Wow.
Yeah, back in those days.
Okay, there you go. Okay, bringing up some strong feelings. So when I said among friends, it was plural because today we're going to be talking about Devy and college ball with the one and only John Laub. John, how's it going?
It's going great, man. You know, I've been able to relax over the summer. Anyone who's a professional educator knows how incredibly important it is just to kind of get yourself away from the daily grind of education. But now I'm rejoiced. I'm fun. I'm rejuvenated. So I can't wait for the new school year. But it's really about football season. I look back on my life, and there's always this duality every fall, right? I'm going back to school. So when you're 12 years old, you don't want to go back to school, but the NFL season kicks off or the college season kicks off. So it was always this double-edged sword my whole life, right? You want the football season by mid-August so badly. But when you're a little kid, you're like, oh, I got to go to school soon. But yeah, I'm ready for it.
Yes. So I was going to kick off the episode that we were going to record a couple months ago with a little bit of Alice Cooper's School's Out for Summer, but we can't really do that anymore because school's about to be in. In fact, it's in some places across the country. And with the football season starting, your Broncos, Steve Watson, wore number 81, a guy that I forgot about. He was 79 to 87. So I was born in 78. I remember the Jets in the 80s. Steve Watson, a couple good, over 1,000-yard receiving seasons. And for your Michigan Wolverines, the victors valiant, the champions of the West, Glenn Steele, the defensive end from the 90s.
So people aren't going to believe this. My first fantasy league was 1981, freshman year of high school.
Wow.
My friends Dave and Jeff formed the league. We didn't really know it was just straight touchdowns and straight extra points. You know, we didn't do yardage back in the day. And it's funny because my first three players were Terry Bradshaw, Lynn Swann, and Walter Payton. They didn't actually have very good years. I thought I was going to have an incredible team, but it wasn't as good as I thought. But my first waiver wire pickup ever was Steve Watson because I was a Bronco fan, and this was before you had ESPN, at least in my town. I guess it's 81. I didn't have ESPN until 84 in my neighborhood. So I remember getting Pro Football Weekly, and you would have to look through the box scores because sometimes on the East Coast, you wouldn't even have a West Coast game. If there was a kickoff at 4 o'clock on West Coast, like Chargers, Raiders, there was only a 50% chance that it was in the Monday box score. So sometimes in the newspaper, so you'd have to wait until Pro Football Weekly came out. And I remember looking in the box, I'm like, who's this dude Watson? He had 13 touchdowns that year. And as a Bronco fan, when you're, I'm trying to think, I must have been 14 years old at that time. I picked him up, and I've always remember glowingly Steve Watson, 3,000-yard seasons. The year that broke him up was the strike season. So that's even hard to count. Craig Morton was my favorite quarterback as a kid. So I remember Steve Watson vividly. And then when the three amigos, if anyone remembers the Broncos in the Super Bowl with Elway, they had Mark Jackson, Vance Johnson, and Ricky Nattiel. And they kind of replaced Watson, even though Watson was on the roster. And I will say I've been lucky. Every major sport, I've won a national championship or Super Bowl championship of some kind. Michigan, I've won one, so I can't complain by any stretch. And I still remember the national championship team. You mentioned Glenn Steele. I remember it more for offense because even though it's ironic, you did have Charles Woodson on that team. So I do remember him. He was just such a special player. But Greasy and Lloyd Carr, the coach and all that. But I was just looking it up before. Steele had 45 tackles for loss and 24 career sacks. And he was a fourth-round pick of the Steelers. He's not one of those players who I would, in my dominant Michigan memory, I was mostly an offensive guy, so I can probably name a lot of running backs and a lot of offensive linemen, and obviously the quarterbacks back in the day. But now that I looked them up, I do remember that defense was good in 1997.
Yeah, it was so Desmond Howard. What year did he graduate? Because he was in the Super Bowl with the Packers in '96, right?
Yeah, so
he must have graduated in like '94ish, something like that, maybe.
No, because remember he was with the Washington. It was the Redskins at the time. He was a fourth-round pick. I think he wins the Heisman in '90 or '91. Desmond.
Oh wow, okay, yeah.
And then I think he ended up. Who drafted him? Maybe it was Washington. And then he ends up in Jacksonville because Washington exposed him to the expansion draft with the Jacksonville Jaguars took him. And then he ended up on Green Bay. And one thing I will say, who's the coach? Holmgren, Mike Holmgren. He used Desmond Howard the right way. He got him in space a little bit. Kickoff return. He returned the kick for a touchdown against the Patriots. I think Howard, if he was born now or if he played in the last decade, I think he might have had a better career. I think they didn't know how to use a player his size in the 90s, and they wanted him to be an X receiver. I think originally Joe Gibbs put him out on the X, and it just wasn't, now they get him in space, put him in the slot, move him around. His skill set. I will say two players remind me of that, Raghib Ismail of Notre Dame and Desmond Howard. I think they would be more successful just from a professional career in today's game than they were back then.
That makes sense. Yeah. So all of us here are old enough to remember when the Rose Bowl was just automatically the winner of the Big Ten and Pac-10. And by the way, Michigan and USC were in separate conferences. So
I know
how far we've come in that short time, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I probably watched every Rose Bowl from 78 to about 99, maybe 2000. I will watch it if I'm around, but I don't go out of my way anymore. The one thing I remember is Michigan always lost. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I have lots of memories of Michigan going out to the Rose Bowl, getting smacked. And I think they're, the old, I don't know if it's a narrative or whatever, but when the Big Ten would go out to California in the sunshine, the California kids knew how to play, and the Big Ten kids were enjoying the sunshine and the beach. And they always, in general, the Pac-12 won those games in the 80s and 90s when the Big Ten went out there.
When it comes to college, like content, Devy, College Fantasy, which you just did a live draft Kings Classic at the Expo for College Fantasy. How did you settle into like this is going to be my niche? This is going to be where I'm going to find my voice.
That's a great question because I started playing 15 years ago, if my memory serves me. I think this is my 16th year playing college fantasy football. I was dating a woman before I got married to my lovely wife. And I was Saturday, she was at her mom's house or doing something. And I'm on CBS Sports Line. It's in the summer, so I'm doing my fantasy baseball team at the time. And I see this, the banner. I don't even know if they call them banner on websites, but in the 90s or the turn of the century, they would call them a banner. Said, we have college fantasy football. I'm like, what? I had been playing NFL since 1989. Never heard of at college fantasy football. So I went on CBS Sportsline and I joined a league, just like we do now. You join a public league. And I ended up joining 2 that year, and I won both times. I won both leagues. Like I was 9-2. My teams were like Tim McCoy, Michael Crabtree, Tim Tebow, LaShawn McCoy, Michael Crabtree. I'll never forget those 3 players and how good they were back then. So I won. And one of the things that I started to notice is there was very limited knowledge. Like you had CBS Sportsline, and they didn't have columnists. It wasn't like they did for the NFL. The NFL, I've been reading CBS Sportsline columnists for decades now, right? No one, they just put up the stats. They put up the rankings, whatever they were, and they were, I think, by ADP or whatever their limited projections. Maybe someone was serving rankings to them. And by about year 5 or 6, I said, man, there's no one in this space. And I don't mean that in a bad way. There was a few people, but it wasn't popular enough, if that makes any sense. And I said, well, I love this game. I'm enjoying the heck out of it. Why don't I just start trying to publish? I want a fantasy slant. I was reading Phil Steele, and I'm reading Athlon's, and I'm reading Lindy's. It's Lindy's magazine, right? But there was nothing with the fantasy slant, except for there was a site, College Fantasy Football Nerd. I think that was at the time the biggest site. And I said, well, I can do rankings and I can write a profile of players. And at that point, it was my 6th year playing. So I've been writing for 10 years, providing content. And I just said, let me post my player profiles and my rankings. Literally I asked Emil Cadillac at Football Diehards if he would be willing to put college fantasy football rankings up? And Emil and I have been friends. Geez, that had to be, by then we were friends for almost 20 years. He said, sure, I'd love to post it on Football Diehards. So I did that for 3 years, then Fantrax, and CBS got out of it. I don't know if you were playing at the time, but CBS Sports got out of the college fantasy football industry. Fantrax is the only one that remained. And they had nothing. So I sent an email to the help desk searching for writers. Like, do you need anyone who writes college fantasy football? I attached 3 articles that I did up for Football Diehards. And they hired me. They're like, if you want to provide content, go for it. So this is my 8th year providing content for the for Fantrax.
Oh, wow. That's cool. I have a Campus to Canton League there, so I've probably read some of your stuff.
Yeah, if it's anything we other people have joined me, and right now Joe Goody's doing it with me, but other than it's just Joe or I. And if you read the top 24 quarterbacks, that's mine, 24 running backs, all that kind of stuff.
Right on.
Before we launch into the content, any questions for John, Jesse, or?
Well, I have some specific questions, but I kind of want to get into once we're like talking about theory and strategy and then specific players.
Okay, so before we get into sort of the kitschy, corny, teachery way that I've divided up the show sheet here, because why not? Let's lean into it. We got 2 teachers here. And 1 class clown. Sorry, Jesse. I just want to introduce folks to the John Laub drinking game that I came up with. Okay. So every time you have to lower your volume, drink. Every time John calls me or Jesse my friend, drink. Every time John calls a college player young man, drink. Every time John says my model, drink. All right, and we'll see how drunk folks get by the end of it. By the way, that said with, as you know, nothing but just gobs of love, John.
Oh, it's all cool, man. Thank you for listening. I mean, that's the most important. But yeah, thank you.
And is this on top of any of us saying this is a guy?
Oh yeah, this is a guy. Yeah, that's drink twice. Yeah, and spin around the baseball dizzy bats. All right, so let's start with syllabus and curriculum. Jesse has some specific questions for you, but before we get into that, any sort of overall like do's and don'ts for people who are getting into Devy's, specifically, I personally don't really lean into quarterbacks, especially freshmen, because there's just so much that can happen between then and the NFL, and quarterbacks so hard to predict, things like that. Any sort of like basic, rules of thumb for folks who might be new to Devy or looking to get better at Devy?
I'm going to give you three that I think that have helped me and hopefully will help our listeners. One, don't overrate freshmen. I'm sorry. I'm a need to see it guy. I know the scouting services, and they're very good. I mean, I'm not going to tell you that I've seen every 3-star recruit coming in from college, but I need to see it a year on the college field. I mean, that's just – now, there are some different – like last year, I was into Nicholas Singleton at Penn State. Anyone who listened to my stuff, I was a huge Singleton guy. And I even had him in my regular college fantasy leagues because I thought he was just too good and he was going to smash. And he had a very good season. I mean, I think he had 12 touchdowns and over 1,000 yards as a true freshman. But that's rare. And it's just as common to have a guy like Damon Martinez at Oregon State last year who was on no one's radar, or very few, let me say that. Quinshawn Judkins, who was not on very many people's radars, as well as Braylon Allen when he was a freshman. What was that now, 2021 already? I think when he was a freshman, because he was converted linebacker to running back. He was 17 years of age. I think he was a 4-star prospect, but like a low 4-star prospect. My old curmudgeonly self, I've seen too many 5-stars fail. Don't overrate the freshman. It's just to me, it's not a game you're going to win. Yeah, you might hit on Nicholas Singleton, but there's no one in this class, even Cedric Baxter, who I like at Texas, and Justice Hayes or Haynes? I always forget.
Haynes,
at Alabama.
yes.
Haynes. Guys, look at what Alabama does.
Yeah.
They don't start running backs until they're a junior at best.
Yeah.
You're going to sit on a running back for 2 years before he ever gets 200 carries? I mean, it just, I don't overrate the freshman. And I know people are waxing poetically about this freshman class of quarterbacks, and they're very interesting. Don't get me wrong. The odds of these 5 that everyone's talking about making it to the NFL, I mean, please, if two of them are going to make it all the way to the NFL, that's incredible. Do you have any idea how incredible that would be if 5-star quarterback prospects made it to the NFL coming out of high school? It just doesn't happen, folks. So you're more likely to guess on who doesn't make it for a myriad of reasons than you are to make it. That's one of the reasons why in Devy, and this is, I'm just side note, the reason why I took Manning. I'm sorry. It's just the family, the culture, what he's learned. They're going to support him in everything that he can do. There are so many external factors that will enable Manning to be successful. It's insanity. I mean, his grandfather and his uncles play. He understands what the culture's about. He understands how to get there. He's not bamboozled by money. He doesn't need the NIL, and I know he's getting some NIL. He's going to be focused on football. The parents can pay him everything. They can get him tutors. The classroom is not going to be a challenge. They're going to drive him around campus. Like, all of these little things matter. They're 18-year-old, first drinking young men. They're 18-year-old young men. Manning's going to have all of the network around him that he needs. And I don't know if he's going to make it. I mean, the odds are, I would probably give him a 40% chance. Yes, does he have big? There's no question he has skills. Is he in the right system with the right coach? Probably. If Shark's still there, as long as they don't bottom out at Texas, he should be in the right spot at the right place. So don't overvalue freshmen. 2, forget about tight ends. Just, Devy, if you're drafting a tight end, you're just doing it wrong. You're not going to pick up one. I mean,
but Tavian Sanders, Oscar Delp, come on.
I mean,
Michael Trigg, 3 years running, we're looking for Michael Trigg to be something, right?
And then who was? I really feel bad for this young man. He's now at his 3rd or 4th school. The young man who went to
Eric Gilbert.
Yes, Eric Gilbert. How many times were we told he was next greatest Rob Gronkowski ever? And I hope the young man finds his path. That's more important than anything he does on the football field. Heard lots of rumors, lots of stuff, but he's not successful right now at football. There's other things this young man needs. So, and he was supposed to be as good as anyone. So I don't even go near the tight end position. I also I want players who I only have to roster in general. 2 years max, I prefer one. We've all loved football. Injuries are so dramatic. So the odds, and I love Nicholas Singleton. We got 2 more years of him on college campus. Like, that's a lot for a running back. Now, I think he might be a little lucky because he got Katron Allen, so he might not get the 320 touches / carries that other big-time running backs have. But, man, we've all seen injuries derail these young men. So I try to limit the amount of time that a young man's on campus, which will give me also a better shot at getting me an asset to trade, a chip to trade down the road. Like, I don't want to sit on a player. And I mean, Bijan Robinson, those who drafted him in Devy 3 years ago, it turned out to work, but that's rare. I mean, he's just that special of a player.
Yeah. So I was going to ask, like, when you do, land, say, a freshman, are you then looking to like flip him if he hits because you don't want to, so that you, and you kind of answered that. But Jesse and I have talked about, the graveyard of Devy darlings, right? Like Spencer Rattler, Zamir White, like, and it's a long way to it's a long way to Tipperary is an old Irish song, but like, it's a long way to the NFL, and a lot of stuff can happen. Yeah.
I never had one Spencer Rattler and one DJU, and people thought I was crazy. Mm-hmm. And I just said they're going first and second. Mm-hmm. I mean, you don't know. And I like DJU against Notre Dame. I had him as a top 5 college fantasy football quarterback that year. I mean, I didn't know he would fall apart. Clemson would fall apart. Like everything, a lot of things happen, right? But I had seen skills and size and future prosperity all fell apart. And think about it. If this was summer of 2021, what would we be talking about? Spencer Rattler was going to be the next big thing. And all I remember, what's that show he was on? What's that high school court and one? So I remember, if you watch, they do a show on Netflix, I think. I forget where I watch. I watch all this stuff. But they had him in high school as a quarterback, and they interview him. And I know, Brian, you're like me, you're a teacher. Culture matters. Personality matters. And when I saw Spencer Rattler, I said, that's not a college leader's role. Like, that's not going to fly with 22-year-old men. Just not going to work. That's another thing why Manning, you don't think Manning knows how to treat people with his grandfather and his uncles? Please. Like, those. Go ahead.
And you hear now, too, on that Netflix or no, some other documentary just about Johnny football, where he's like, yeah, I didn't watch any fucking tape at all, So like, I'm going to give you a deep cut and then throw it over to Jesse. He's got some Devy rebuild questions. Kalon Laborn or Kalon Laborn or however you pronounce it, right? Five-star recruit, right? 2 knee surgeries, weed possession, which doesn't make you a bad person, but it got you in trouble.
No.
And some other team discipline or something like that, and 2 knee surgeries. And, and then now he's lost all his burst. He's on Marshall and trying to scrape by on the 49ers practice squad. So like that, the life of a 5-star can go really wrong, really wrong. Yeah.
That's another reason why I like Manning at number 1, because I think all of that stuff's in place for him.
Jesse, Devy rebuild.
Yeah, so great tie-in. Speaking of Spencer Rattler, my first ever Devy league, I took Spencer Rattler first. At the end of the first round, and then at the beginning of the second round, I took Sam Howell. So then, so I think we did the Devy first, and then we did our startup for the NFL. So I thought to myself, all right, well, I got these first and second round, stud college quarterbacks. I'm just going to take 2 super flex quarterbacks, and I'm going to be fine. And one of them was Lamar Jackson. So I wasn't fine, right? So I was fine for a year, but after that, not so much. Okay. So long story short, this all led to a rebuild. All right. So now I'm in the process. I decided beginning of last year, I'm going to rebuild this Devy team. So I have some specific questions about what you would do in certain situations. So, you talked about Arch Manning and the other 5-star quarterbacks. I had the 101 and I took Arch Manning. So
I would have taken Archie Manning too, or Baxter. Those are the only two, but I think Manning is a better chance.
So this was a combined draft with NFL rookies as well, right? Those that weren't on Devy rosters. So other players were Zay Flowers, Dalton Kincaid. So late first round NFL picks. I later came to kind of look at that and regret taking Arch Manning. Would you agree?
No, I'm okay with Archie Manning because I look at. We can discuss, and there's different. Some people like his arm strength. Some people think it's not as good. Some like the athleticism. Some think it's not as good as athleticism. Well, all that stuff is fine. He has to grow. He has to develop. He has to become a leader of men. And I think sometimes when we talk about the quarterback position, like we don't necessarily discuss what it means to be a leader of men. All of that stuff that Manning needs to be successful is there for him in his family. I think you made the right choice. I'll also tell you why. He's not going to lose Devy value.
That's what I kept thinking.
If you want to flip Manning next year, let's just say Quinn Ewers. Let's make up a narrative. Quinn Ewers, they're 2-3 at Texas, right? They lose to Alabama. They get upset twice. They bench Ewers and put in Manning. Now, I don't think it'll happen, but let's say it does. God, you could flip Manning for 2 first-round picks at that point. Gotcha. Once people see him on the field, and I think if he, which is more likely, he won't play this year, right? I still think you can flip Manning next year.
Yeah, as soon as he becomes a starter, he gains value, right?
Oh my God, immediately. You could probably get 2 number ones. You could get like a 24 number one and a 25 number one. It's a Manning.
So the upside of a prospect like this moves the needle way more than a late first round pick like Zay Flowers or Dalton.
Oh, now I like Nico, right? But he's going to Josh Heupel's system. We aren't exactly sure if the young man has all the other requirements necessary to be an NFL quarterback. I think Manning is most likely to retain the value. And once he steps on the field, he skyrockets in value.
So a lot of rookies did go right after Arch Manning. And then the quarterbacks after that, well, Malachi Nelson did go 107. And I know a lot of people like Malachi Nelson over Arch Manning, and they think Arch Manning is more of a name, blah, 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 and Malachi Nelson, blah, blah, blah. I understand all of that. What I'm trying to do is figure out, all right, now where do I take those 5-star quarterbacks that could actually hit and have this huge upside? So like Dante Moore at 209, right? With players like Evan Stewart or from a rookie standpoint, like Sam Laporta or Rashee Rice.
All right, I will take Nico over Laporta, the tight end. There's too much risk at the tight end.
Gotcha.
I would Evan Stewart. I'd probably go the wide receiver, Texas A&M. Now, I don't have the most confidence in Jimbo Fisher. However, he is too good of a wide receiver. If anyone can transcend some stumble bumming that might go on at Texas A&M or lack of coaching, I think Evan Stewart is the player who can do that. And I like the wide receivers to bank on. And then who was the other player that you would give?
Rashee Rice or Mingo?
There's no question. I take Nico over Rashee Rice. The name still is way too valuable in Josh Heupel's system.
And do you feel the same way about, like, say, Dante Moore or?
Yeah, let me ask you one thing. When was the last time a Brian Kelly quarterback made it to the NFL?
Ooh. I don't know.
I'm just
you
saying.
Tell me.
Marcus Mariota is the only one, I think. I guess PTR might be in it, but like, what was he, a 6th-round pick this year? I mean,
yeah, Mariota stinks.
Wait,
Mariota.
Are we Chip Kelly?
No,
Chip
Brian
Kelly.
You're talking about Chip Kelly?
Yeah, you know Chip Kelly.
Oh, we don't.
No
We
Chip
don't
Kelly
talk about
guys
Chip
who are
Kelly
not make it.
Eagles fans don't talk about Chip.
No, but
but you're right.
but
I didn't realize that. I didn't realize Dante Moore was playing.
that's
for
why
Chip Kelly.
I haven't taken one of Malachi. I don't have any. Like, I'm just like, I don't know if Chip Kelly's going to coach him up.
You mean Dante?
Dante Moore, sorry.
Yeah,
sorry.
okay.
Dante.
Yeah. I was just trying to make sure. I was
No,
like,
my
wait,
fault.
what?
No, my fault.
Okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
So what? All right. So now we've been talking about the top end quarterbacks in the 26 class.
Yeah.
I'm curious about. Let's compare Carnell Tate. I went back to the Steelers for a minute there. Versus a rookie such as Jalen Hyatt or again Rashi Rice.
Oh, I'm taking the Ohio State wide receiver.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in culture. If you think about what Brian Hartline and Ryan Day have created at the culture on that campus, in the wide receiver locker room, we are talking about elite. We have right now Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jackson Smith and Jigba. Then we're going to have guarantee. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to go in the top 5. I do.
Yeah.
And I think Emeka Ibuka is going to go in the first round. You're talking about 5 wide receivers in the first round in the last 3 years.
And Jamison Williams.
What?
And Jamison Williams.
Oh, and Jamison Williams. I forgot. Oh, my God. Now, I will say one. Yeah. But you're right. I think of him more as an Alabama recruit who ended up at Ohio State. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Hartline's doing something right. Right? What I think is underrated. Not only do you have to find the talent, you have to create a culture on that campus in which that talent can thrive at the NFL level. And then you have to coach them up. And that is not done by every coach at every position. Hardline in Ohio State is just simply ridiculous right now, what's going on there. So I'm taking the next man up in a Buckeyes uniform.
Are we talking about Brian Hartline, the former NFL wide receiver?
He's a wide receiver coach. He's the guy doing the work. He
wasn't in the NFL. I guess he's doing it now, though. I mean, he was pretty average as a player.
Yeah, there's one other wide receiver he's coached who was an NFL pick, and it's before Olave and Wilson. I forgot the name. I can't just remember right now. But it's silly the talent that he's coaching up at the Ohio State level. So if Ryan Day and Brian Hartline have identified Tate as that guy, my friend, he's smarter than I am. Okay. That's it. I'm done. I made the same argument last year and people didn't believe me. I was all in Jahmyr Gibbs. And I said, look, Nick Saban's smarter than I am when it comes to football. If Nick Saban says Jahmyr Gibbs is good, and I like Jahmyr Gibbs a lot at Georgia Tech, but once he signed with Alabama, I'm like, I'm all in. Every chip is on the front table. Nick Saban knows what he's doing with running backs more than I do. If he said, give me him, if Brian Hartline and Ryan Day like him, all in. That's it. Where's all the chips? I'll take any Ohio State wide receiver. Now, look, we had Julian Fleming, right? He hasn't worked out, but the room is just too crowded. You can only have so many players.
So the Jahmyr Gibbs brings me to the question that I have before we move to the next part, and that is the transfer portal, right? These guys are like free agents, which, by the way, I'm pro worker, I'm pro student.
Oh, no, I know. I love it for that.
Right. Like, but it can be kind of hard sometimes with 130 teams to keep track of for a Devy manager. What are some tips on dealing with the transfer portal? Is there like an archetype of a guy to look at that's like, oh, here's a guy who's like stuck on like a crowded team, but like he's really good, he'll probably transfer? Or is there any way to like get a hold of it or predict it or deal with it that you've looked at going into Devy? Any sort of rules of thumb that you can give us?
So the first one is the elite programs. Let's say Michigan, let's just pretend for a second, right?
Yeah, let's pretend Michigan's elite, John.
Let's say both Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards go to the NFL, which I think is likely next year, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they chose a running back from a group of 5 school. Harbaugh and his staff says, this is the young man we want from Tulane.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I'm all in. Because they're going to put him into that system. It doesn't matter. Here's the reality. At that point, his high school profile no longer matters. I don't care. They've judged him what he's done in college. Because they're not bringing on a player who hasn't. So when I'm looking for players who go up from G5 to Power 5, it's about system. If Michigan brings in wide receiver from Kent State, I'm probably not going to be that interested. But why do I like?
Because Michigan doesn't produce enough good wide receivers. They don't use them well enough, right? Like DPJ,
they don't use them
Nico
well
Collins,
enough. They don't coach him up.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why would I? I mean, and there's a very good chance Michigan next year could bring in a G5 wide receiver, but I'm not interested. But let's look at Devontae Walker. Now I'm still hoping, knock on wood, the NCAA's got to fix it. That's absurd. Let's say he plays. Why is he so interested? It's the scheme. I know they switched from Phil Longo. I get it. But he's playing with an NFL quarterback in Drake May. And what I'm saying is, at the end of the day, Matt Brown's still the guy in charge. While you do switch coordinators, last I looked, the head coach still has a very powerful say in matters. So if NC is bringing in a guy from Kent State at the G5 level, and I look immediately, let me see what his size is. I have my Devy rankings open. Let me just see what he's got here.
I'm just learning there's a chance he won't play. I just took him in a
it's so sad, dude. They've got to switch. Like, seriously, they've got to switch it. Here he is, 6'2", 195. That's NFL size.
Yeah.
If Matt Brown and the coaching staff identified him, I have him right now at number 14 in my Devy rankings. Now, obviously, he could go down if he doesn't even play this year, right? But I got to think the NCAA is going to wake up. This is just absurd what they're doing to this young man. But it's the system. That's the system with Matt Brown, and I understand they switch coordinators, but what I see is NFL size with a nice resume, average 16.6 yards per catch, going to a system that's going to use him. So I'm looking for systems, because coaches, no matter who we are, they are looking to identify skills or traits that will excel in their system. That's why I love Jahmyr Gibbs going to Alabama. And I will bank on that often.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what we do need, I'll say one thing. We need a Josh Heupel player to really bust loose in the NFL. We haven't had that yet. I do think they will eventually. But there is some trepidation in the back of my mind sometimes. None of these Heupel guys have gone on to NFL success. I mean, if I'm playing...
For folks who may not know much about it, what you're alluding to is the idea that Heupel's offense is Mickey Mouse gimmicky, not NFL style, right? Is that kind of like, half field reads for Hendon Hooker, scheming Jalen Hyatt open, because he's 15 yards off the line to begin with, like stuff like that.
Yeah. And you know how I learned this the hard way? Baylor wide receivers.
Yeah, huh? How about
Baylor?
That? Yeah.
All those Baylor, I thought they were good wide receivers. Many of them were drafted in the top 2 or 3 rounds, right? Who was good out of the wide
I
receivers?
was still on Tyquan Thornton. I thought he was overdrafted in the 3rd round, but I still liked him. I still like, he can be something, but here he is.
Well, the only advantage with Thornton is he wasn't in the Art Briles system. So there's still some hope, but I'm like that Art Briles system, which Heupel is similar. You mentioned it. He maximizes the wide side of the field. He stacks his wide receivers and he finds the one on the linebacker and he schemes them open. Right. Sorry about my dogs, everyone. They're just having a really good time.
Mine just had a squeaky toy, so we're good. Yeah.
Kendall Wright. Kendall Wright was the one that got me.
Kendall
a little
Wright.
bit Corey Coleman.
Yeah. But Bryles had to say, remember, I'm like, but it's just running routes, right? I'm thinking like, they're so athletic. They're so good. I know he takes plays off Bryles. Like he literally used to have his wide receivers not run a route. I'm like, oh, they'll be able to do it at the NFL level. Never worked out. So we need Heupel's system. We need Jalen Hylett, Cedric Tillman, Velus Jones, one of these young men to come through at the NFL level, and let's see what happens.
So, keeping with our corny teacher theme, our do now, our anticipatory set, John, is what is one player that you want the most shares of in Devy or college fantasy, your pick, and does that answer say anything about your approach?
I'm going to get beat up about this, but